Hikers and backpackers, what is the weirdest or creepiest thing you have found while hiking? Part 2. Not real weird, but terrifying. I was camping outside my family's cabin in northern Wisconsin. We had the whole family plus some others there, so the cabin was pretty full, and we decided to grab a tent instead. About 3 a.m., my dog started growling, and I could hear sniffing right outside the tent. She started barking and whatever it was ran away. A couple of days later, we were the last ones to leave the cabin. It was about midnight or so when we were about to start driving. We were sitting in the car in the dark just talking, and my dog started going nuts again. I turned on the headlights and saw what looked like an entire wolf pack standing about 15 feet in front of the car. We started driving and got the hell out of there. I've spent various stretches of time backpacking and camping throughout the United States and seen some strange things. My brother and I came across an abandoned trailer town, of sorts, that scared the hell out of us. We also came across a rundown town, really small, out in New Mexico that seemed to have one person living in it. We based that on the fact that there was still some food and supplies there that were fairly fresh, perhaps just a few days old. Spent a couple of days there trying to find the person, just to find out why they were staying in the town. Never found a person. We found the skeletal remains of an unknown number of deer, ranging from bucks to fawns, ensnared in a barbed wire fence that encompassed a 10 by 10 area in the Ozarks. A few of the skulls topped the fence posts, and there was one post in the middle of this area that had decaying deer bodies, looked to be 2, but there were only 6 hooves jutting out of the wreckage, wrapped around it. We found a dummy hanging from a tree while in the Yukon Territory of Canada. Literally out in the middle of the woods. No reason for it, as far as we know. And we also came across a lifeless junkie on a road out of Olympia. Obvious overdose, as he had his arm tied and a needle in hand. We were hiking in a small reservation in New York and we were looking for a site to pitch our tents. My friend went off to scout out a location about 100 yards away while we all took a break from carrying the stuff. It was thick forest so we couldn't see that far, and about 20 seconds later he came running back to us and we asked him what happened. He told us that it was getting a little dark so he couldn't see that well and heard voices and footsteps nearby, and saw lights moving. He was so sure it was us that he ran towards them to ask why we were starting to move on. He got there and saw that there was nothing. He was totally sure it was people walking in the woods, and when he saw it was literally nothing, he booked it away. This was a big, pretty fearless military type guy and he was scared to death. We still don't know if he was just seeing things or what, but it scared the hell out of all of us. A number of years ago, back in Colorado, near Evergreen, an ex-girlfriend and I were walking our 2 dogs along a fairly popular trail. It was an approximately 2-mile loop around a rocky point, the backside of which ran along a heavily forested area. We got a late start, so the sun was starting to set as we left, but it was no big deal as we had done this hike plenty of times before. Around the halfway point, we started hearing what sounded like a woman screaming, sort of, in the distance, and the hair on my neck just stood up. What really spooked me was our dogs, both German Shepherd mixes. Once we heard the first sound, both dogs went into tails tucked, ears down mode, pulling hard at the leashes to get the hell out of there. The sound got closer and maintained the same distance and direction from us as we fast walked our way back to the truck. And it kept screaming at us. We later found out that sound was a mountain lion, which apparently followed us all the way back to the parking lot. We never did see it, but it scared the hell out of both of us. A friend and I decided to go have a little campfire cookout and catch up. We were both 18 or 19-year-old girls at the time. We had the fire going, roasting some marshmallows, and were out of cell service range. A guy in his 30s popped out of the woods with a bike and camping stuff all over it, looking homeless. He sat down, telling us how he had been living in the woods for months, only coming down sometimes to get a chicken. Nothing he said was super alarming, and I'm usually pretty chill with people even if they're eccentric, but something, I don't know what, something was just very wrong. Like every hair was standing on end and I just wanted to run. Finally, he got up to get something to show us from his bike. I told my friend to get in the car, now. Leave all the stuff, mostly food and cooking utensils anyway, we weren't staying the night, and just go. I cranked it and we hauled ass out of there. I apologized to her for ruining the evening, but she said she had the same feeling and was really glad we got away. Geocaching hike deep in the New Mexico wilderness. Entered a clearing and saw a series of half-built / crumbling concrete structures. rebar poking out of the concrete, and a dirt road approaching from the opposite direction of my hike. Footprints and some recent trash indicated people were still using the site. The whole thing seemed somehow post-apocalyptic and eerie. I was hiking alone, and for some reason the whole situation was freaking me out a bit. I decided to abort the hike and back out the way I hiked in. Found out later the site was used as a paintball tournament ground and designed on an urban warfare theme. There was absolutely no evidence of spent balls or paint on the concrete walls, which explains my confusion and the eeriness of finding half-destroyed buildings in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so I was recently on a solo hike in Central Australia. It was about 260 kilometers or 161 miles out of Alice Springs. The start of the trail takes almost 3 hours to drive to from the center of Australia. There is no mobile reception, and you're very unlikely to come across other cars because the space is just so vast. The trail itself is a really long hike around a gorge that has beautiful lookout points and billabongs, waterholes, and it's part of a wider trail known as the Larapinta Trail. So I was headed out to this hike and got there very early in the morning, like I was starting to hike at about 7:30 a.m. I had a day pack plus additional supplies in my car. It's winter in Australia, so there aren't many people in the outback and even fewer on these trails, as it gets to negative temperatures overnight. So I drove out to one of the furthest gorges. I was the only car on the road, the only car in the parking lot when I pulled up to the national park entry. The campsite was empty, with no recent fires. I really enjoy this solitude and was looking forward to a morning hike and picnic with me and nature. I got started, day pack on, ready for the day. The hike was beautiful but still extremely cold. I reached the first major lookout about 45 minutes to an hour later and saw a series of small billabongs in the gorge below and thought, by the time I get down there, it'll be mid-morning and I'll have a snack and write in my journal or make a video diary. I headed down there and it took about another 40 minutes. So it was almost 9 a.m. It was just above freezing now, but I had warmed up from the walk. I reached the bottom of the gorge, and I was well over 170 miles from the closest small population of people. Walking across, I was going to wash my hands in the billabong, which was in the sunlight, when from behind me, I heard, "Hello," in a German accent. I said hello back to him and kept walking slowly. I didn't want to turn my back to him. He had long hair, a very full beard, and was wearing very few clothes, with what looked like maybe a shirt on a rock near him, and he was clearly wet. There was a billabong behind him, and I couldn't see shoes, a day pack, or a hiking pack anywhere near him. He asked how I was and how my day was. A little freaked out, I started over-explaining that I had friends waiting back in town for me that evening and how beautiful the walk was. He didn't really engage with anything I said. He just nodded and said, "Yes, here is very beautiful. You should see the stars." Thinking it might be a case of him being high, I was just trying to be polite and get the hell out of there as soon as I could. I was polite and explained I just needed to get some supplies out of my day pack. As I pulled everything out that I needed, I also pulled out my morning fruit. I got my supplies and packed them all in, not letting him out of my sight as he just stood there, wet, in the shade and near freezing temperatures. I politely said I was going to explore the gorge a little more and pulled out my phone to make a non-confrontational exit. I took a few photos of the walls of the gorge and 1 or 2 selfies. All the while, he was just standing there looking at me. He then offered to take a photo of me. Nervously, I said yes and threw him my phone. He took some photos that were really bad, out of focus, and I was blinking, then threw my phone back. I said thanks, pulled out my fruit, and started to walk with him still in my peripheral vision. He then said, "Wow, is that an apple? I don't associate them with the Australian outback." I said that it was winter so they grow well and asked if he wanted it. He said yes, and I threw it to him. At this point, I was so freaked out I just said goodbye and quickly walked the hell out of there. As I walked away, I tried to take a photo over my shoulder in selfie mode to get him in a picture. Just in case. Later that day and about 15 to 17 more miles into the hike, I came across a much more popular tourist destination. It was much later in the day and there were more people around. I came across 2 British walkers on the wider, multi-day Larapinta Trail. We walked together for a bit and I got to talking about the weird German guy I met. Now, they had walked from the western side of the gorge to the far eastern side, where we met up. They passed through where I had been and saw nothing. They didn't seem to think it was as weird or funny as I did. They asked if I got his name or anything. I said no and asked why. They then let me know that to do the Larapinta Trail, you can't get on it without the rangers knowing. You have to register your name and sign a logbook at every check-in point. If the rangers check it and see you haven't signed anything in over a day, a massive search is started to look for hikers and so on. They seemed worried that he might be lost or hurt if he was just out there with no sign of a fire overnight. We were headed to a check-in point and we flipped through the book. 3 names. 2 of them were the 2 British guys, and 1 was a lady from 3 weeks ago, so she had well and truly gone home. As they were on the western side overnight and didn't meet anyone else and hadn't seen him as they passed through, we were all stuck as to how the hell this guy with no car, bike, or supplies got there, managed to miss us on the few trails that are around, or how he could have survived without anyone seeing him overnight. Eventually, I got back to my car, ready to go home, and looked through the photos. The ones of me by him were really shitty, and the one I tried to take of him was nothing but a sunbeam across the billabong he was in front of. Zooming right in, you can kind of see his feet. But short of that, it was so freaky to look back and see how far away we were from anyone, so early in the morning, so cold. And there he was, swimming in the shade when I came across him. I gave my contact details to the rangers so they could call if any more info was needed. But that's truly the weirdest experience I've ever had on a trail. I was once canoeing the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes interconnected with each other, think mini Great Lakes. We had been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at this point. We didn't really have an itinerary, just planned to boat and camp, fish, and live off the land for 2 weeks. We had a GPS and a satellite phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyway, about a week in, we were set to canoe a few hours to the next lake. An hour or so in and we were in the center of an extremely long and narrow lake. Unfortunately, a storm started to blow in and the waves on the lake swelled to 2+ feet. Too much for our dinky canoes. We pulled off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in a rush to avoid being totally thrashed by a rainstorm. We just set up camp and hunkered down for the night. By the next morning, it had cleared up. We started walking up the coast of the lake about 200 feet from our camp looking for a good fishing spot. What we actually found was another campsite. However, it was absolutely wrecked. Trash strewn everywhere, tent collapsed and torn, clothes on the ground. At first we were just disgusted, like, what assholes did this? Or left their shit out to be bear food. The more we looked around, though, the weirder things seemed. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite being 30 feet in the air. Second, literally everything except the canoes was still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, food, rope, pans, like a serious set of hiking equipment. Enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tent, and clothes. The other half was totally untouched but thrown on the ground. Like somebody noped the hell out of there in nothing but their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars of gear in the process. We waited a couple of hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or gotten any distress calls. We eventually just left everything and moved camp. Everybody was pretty upset by it and a day or 2 later we ended the whole trip early because it seemed like nobody wanted to be out anymore. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. The first thought was a bear attack, but there was food left uneaten, and I've seen bear attacks on camps before, but nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after food and are generally pretty easy to scare away. What still sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there, with half being totally destroyed and half being untouched. I still don't get it. I've done a lot of other camping and hiking, rafting and biking, all around the country and I've never had any other weird experiences like that. It was during the hunting season. I decided to join my uncle and his group for the night. I must clarify, they decided that this year they would just go with the dogs, not to hunt and kill animals. So I was happy to join them. 9 p.m. in the dense forest. No sky, no stars, just cold darkness. The men lit the fire. I just had to watch the stakes so they wouldn't burn. We ate and I decided to go to bed. Usually, there would be at least 2 of them awake during the night to watch over, just in case something happened. That particular night, all the men were all eyes and ears. The dogs were nervous too, pacing back and forth around the fire, gazing into the dark trees ahead. I was 15 and you can only imagine what was running through my mind when I saw all those grown men and dogs looking for or at something particular in the dark. As a rule, my uncle would bring a guitar with him and they would sing crappy 80s rock ballads. Not this night. We just sat quietly and ate. I saw two of the hunters prepping their guns, locked and loaded. I thought it was just for safety reasons. You never know what kind of animal you might come across. I went to my tent with two of the dogs. I have no idea how long I was asleep, but I woke up to hear the dogs growling at something. The light from the fire outside was visible through the tent. I saw my dogs with their teeth showing, looking straight through the tent, but I couldn't see anything. I had to unzip it to see 5 of the 10 men in my uncle's group gathered outside with their guns out. The dogs were there too, snarling and growling, but holding their ground. Then I saw my uncle coming out of the dark ahead of the fire. And the rest of them were coming too. They looked scared. My uncle came to me and asked me to stand still and not to scream, whatever I might see or hear. All the men scattered around the camp, ready for a fight, and there I was, standing still in the middle of it, trying not to tremble or cry. Complete silence everywhere. No birds, no wind, nothing. As I was praying silently to all the deities I was aware of, I saw something in front of me, like it was coming out of the trunk of the nearest tree. At first, I thought it might be my scared mind playing tricks on me, as it had happened before. On the trunk itself, I saw this thin, white line forming a shape of something very tall. No features, just a line that shaped the body. I blinked a few times and I swear I saw something blinking at me. It had black eyes, but I could see the flames from the campfire reflected in them. So big, those eyes were. I have no idea for how long we were staring at each other, but I was as silent as a corpse. Then the eyes disappeared. And that was it. Night birds just appeared in the distance. The wind started to blow again. It was like something heavy was lifted from the camp. Even the dogs calmed down suddenly, but we were all shaking. We all stayed awake for the rest of the night. As soon as the light appeared in the sky, we packed our stuff and went home. We never spoke about that night with my uncle. I was afraid to say what I saw, and he never asked me if I saw anything. Not mine, my parents' experience. My parents, before they were married, were camping down in NSW, Australia. It would have been somewhere near the Blue Mountains National Park. It's been a while since they told me the story. They had gone out hunting, back before the gun regulations. They had planned on camping out there for several nights but didn't stay. Here's why. At night, they had heard loud thumping in the surrounding brush, which didn't make sense since they were pretty far from even the outskirts of the closest city. The following morning they went to the source of where they thought they heard the loud thumping to find palm fronds laid out on the ground, purposefully. Now if you know Australian vegetation, you'll know palms are generally in tropical areas, on the coast, and so on, and not out in dry bushland alongside eucalypt, gum, oak and ash. You will find the occasional palms out there, but it's not overly common. Anyway, they left shortly after. I was staying in my uncle's small A-frame right on the coast of Maine. I was sitting on the porch drinking a cup of coffee and smoking a pipe. It was around midnight and pitch black past the porch. I heard a series of giant crashes, that sounded like large branches were being crushed on the ground, like something was walking on them. I pointed my flashlight inland and saw 2 huge, yellow, angular eyes. From where I was, I could see the outhouse nearby, and these eyes towered above the outhouse, which was a couple of feet taller than a porta-potty. I was the only one awake, and even though I was in my early 20s, I totally freaked out. I ran inside and ran upstairs and grabbed the gun my uncle kept in an attic-type storage space. It was the only gun there. The walls of the building were very thin and all the windows were open to keep cool, and I heard this thing trudging through the brush, circling the cabin repeatedly for what must have been 3 or more times. I still don't know what it was, but I always thought it was strange that it circled the cabin. I was too terrified to look, and I've always kicked myself for not seeing what it was. When I was about 8, my best friend and I went wandering in my parents' woods. It was about 5 acres, totally wooded. We found an awesome spot filled with vines hanging literally everywhere. We were swinging from them, vine to vine, Jungle Book type stuff. It was an absolute blast. We could hear my mom calling us in for dinner. We said, as soon as we get done eating, let's come back out here. We ate our dinner and went back out looking for the spot. Couldn't find it. We searched for over 2 hours, then gave up. Over the next few months, I would look for it and try to find it again. Couldn't find it. It drove me crazy. The more years that went on, the more I started to think, maybe it's a case of my memory making things up. Whether it was a dream or what, I wasn't sure. I had gotten to the point where I thought the event never happened. Then about a year ago, 20 years after the fact, I ran into my friend at the bar. We talked for a while, and about 20 minutes into the conversation he said, "Dude, do you remember when we found all those vines and couldn't ever find them again?" It gave me the chills that a memory I believed to be false was actually confirmed to be true, and how we couldn't find the spot again in over 5 acres of woods. It almost feels like we were sent to another dimension or something. It's not a camping/hiking story, but it happened in the mountains when I was about 14. My family, as well as the families of 2 of my best friends, were renting a house in the Poconos, and the complex was shaped like a circle. There was a playground in the middle, the center section was pretty big, so there was a lot of area to do stuff. It was the afternoon, so my best friends and I decided to get some fresh air and kick a soccer ball around. We found the playground in the center and decided to just play on that for a while. Now, this is where it starts to get weird/creepy. It being the mountains and all, there were a ton of trees everywhere. While we were playing on the swings, we saw this guy standing far away. We assumed it was a guy because he looked pretty big even though he was far away, near where the trees began for the center circle. We couldn't see much about him because he seemed to have his hood up, so we assumed that he was just an odd guy watching us play because he was one of the people who lived here and not many people used it. We were just swinging and talking, but when we looked over at the guy later, he seemed closer than before, but we brushed it off as maybe we were just seeing things. After a while on the swings, we moved over to the spring riders, but there were only 2 of them. I grabbed the second spring rider before one of my friends could get it, but he was pissed. So in retaliation, he threw the soccer ball we had at me but missed. It rolled in the direction of where this dude was standing, but yet again, he was even closer. Now the ball was about 3 times further from us than him. So, in order to not have to move, one of my friends called out to the guy and asked him to throw/kick the ball back to us, but the guy just continued to stand there. All 3 of us were looking right at him and my friend kept talking. He can be pretty loud, so we knew the guy could hear us, but he didn't move, except to get a few feet closer to the ball. We started asking him if he was okay, if he needed anything, and if he could just kick the ball over. Now my friends and I were really weirded out and we wanted to get out of there. My friend started telling me to get the ball because he only threw it because of me, and I was like, fine. I jogged up to the ball and grabbed it, and when I looked up, this guy was like 10 or 20 feet from me. And this guy was big. I was about 5 feet 9 inches or 5 feet 10 inches at the time, and this guy had an easy 6 inches on me, and I still couldn't see his face because of all the shade from the trees, and he still had his hood up. Granted, I only looked up for about 2 seconds, so I didn't have a clear look before I turned around and booked it because it was so creepy. The moment I started running, my 2 friends got up and sprinted. They were both super athletic while I was the tubby one, so I was hauling ass just trying to catch up. When they reached the end of the woods, they looked back at me and this guy was running after me. They screamed at me to run faster, and when I got closer, they turned around and ran again. We turned the corner and headed straight to the house we were staying at, and when we were climbing the stairs, we saw this guy just standing at the edge of the inner circle, not moving anymore. We were so freaked out that we ran inside, closed all of the blinds, and told everyone what just happened. We were scared to death, but we were always little troublemakers, so our parents thought we were joking at first, but we were so frantic that they believed us and assured us nothing was going to happen. The day ended with ice cream, Monopoly, and a movie with the fireplace on. A good end to a weird day. I was living in Brazil and a friend and I decided to do a one-night out and back through mountainous rainforest terrain in one of the southern states. We mostly wanted to get some exercise and do a gear shakeout before going on a longer trip in Patagonia. The experience started out really tough. We were doing almost constant climbing and it was hot. Humidity was near 100% through lush vegetation. Eventually, we were pretty much in clouds and completely drenched from sweat and humidity. It was kind of hellish, soaked to the bone with no chance of drying out. Fortunately, at that altitude, it gets below freezing frequently at night, so there weren't many insects or animals, only birds. We hiked for probably 8 hours with little progress. It was slow going through tough terrain. In the early evening, we came to a flat spot, the first we'd seen in hours, and decided to make camp as it was starting to pour. I basically made camp in several inches of standing water. I was beat anyway, so I just sat in my tent reading. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a girl singing in the distance. The singing kept coming closer, until she was singing right at our tents. She pushed past us and the singing drifted off. She was singing, maybe a lullaby or a children's song, about rain in Portuguese, but it sounded very strange. An hour later, I got woken up to the singing in the distance again. She was coming back towards us, singing the same rain song. As she passed us, I could hear a little exasperation in her voice. She continued singing and went back in the direction of the trailhead. Another hour later, I was again woken up by her singing as she was again coming back towards us, except now she was also crying. She continued to cry and sing as she moved past us for the final time. We woke up that morning, looked at each other, said, "What the hell was that?" and then got on our way. It was very eerie at the time, and I don't have an explanation for it. We were in an extremely isolated location and the trail was definitely only used by recreational hikers, so I really can't say why this woman was out wandering, singing, and crying at 3 a.m. So, I have a story that happened to me and my friends. To set the scene, we were on a Boy Scout camping/shooting trip. There were 20 to 30 of us. We were in a little cabin thing with windows on the front and back, and a front and back door. There were wooden tables all around the area. The adult cabin, with the bathroom, was about an eighth of a mile down a gravel road in the dark. There was obviously a buddy system, because it's Boy Scouts. So it was around midnight, and everyone had been telling scary stories, like on normal camping trips. Well, I had to go to the bathroom and asked my friend to come along. He said sure, and he got our knives. We knew that there were bears in the woods, and it made us feel safer. Well, we went to the bathroom and began our walk back. This is where it got scary. I felt an instinctual, not sure if that's the right word, fear. I looked at my friend, and he had the same look as me. We began to walk a little faster and unfolded our pocket knives. I then turned around and saw it. It looked similar to a cat, but it was about 6 feet tall and was on its hind legs, kind of hunched over. I freaked the hell out and started running. My friend saw it too, and we sprinted back to the cabin. It began making a moaning/howling noise. It was somewhere between the two, and followed us slowly. We pounded on the door, and the guys let us in. We told them what we saw, and they actually believed us. So we locked the front door and looked at the back door. It had no lock. We pushed a table up against it and had a kid there with his knife for safety. We drew the blinds on all the windows that had them, one of them didn't, and we sat there with all the lights on. Then we saw its eyes outside the window without blinds. We were all freaking out, and the thing slowly walked to the back door. We heard it bumping up against it, maybe trying to open it, we thought. It then left, but we still thought we were going to die. No one slept. When the adults came to wake us up, we told them, and they laughed and said we were making it up. We know it happened, even if they don't believe us.